terminal windows with such ferocity that Sarah Chen could barely make out the aircraft parked at the gates through the gray curtain of water. She clutched her resignation letter in one hand and her flight bag in the other, the weight of both, feeling heavier than they should. After 15 years as a flight attendant with Pacific Airways, today was supposed to be her last day. Not flying, but cleaning out her locker and saying goodbye to the crew she'd come to consider family. The terminal buzzed with the familiar chaos of delayed flights and frustrated passengers, but Sarah moved through it all like a ghost. She'd already changed out of her uniform for the last time, trading the navy blue blazer and crisp white shirt for jeans and a sweater that felt foreign after so many years of pressed uniforms. Her badge, usually pinned proudly to her lapel, now sat buried in her purse next to the letter that would officially end her career in aviation. The decision hadn't been easy. The panic attacks had started 6 months ago during a particularly turbulent flight to Seattle. What began as a tightness in her chest had escalated into full-blown episodes where she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't function. The irony wasn't lost on her. Someone who had dedicated her life to making others feel safe in the sky now felt terrorized by the very thing she once loved. Her therapist called it acute flight anxiety, a not uncommon condition among aviation professionals who'd experienced too much turbulence, too many emergency landings, too many moments where the fragile illusion of safety cracked. As she walked toward the crew lounge for what she thought would be the final time, the familiar sounds of the airport surrounded her like a bittersweet symphony. The mechanical voice, announcing departures and arrivals, the rumble of luggage wheels across polished floors, the excited chatter of travelers beginning their journeys. All of it had been the soundtrack to her adult life. She'd met her ex-husband on a flight to Tokyo, had her first panic attack over the Pacific, and had delivered a baby during an emergency landing in Denver. This place held every significant moment of the last decade and a half. The crew lounge smelled of coffee and the industrial cleaning solution they used on everything. Sarah had expected it to be empty. Most flights were delayed or canceled due to the storm, but as she pushed open the door, she found Captain Mike Rodriguez slumped. In one of the worn leather chairs, his usually immaculate uniform wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled. At 58, Mike was one of the most respected pilots at Pacific Airways, known for his steady hands and calm demeanor. Seeing him looking so defeated was jarring. "Sarah?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "I thought you were officially done as of today," she finished, holding up her badge. "Just came to clean out my locker." Mike studied her with the same careful attention he brought to his pre-flight checks. They'd flown together dozens of times over the years, and he'd been one of the few who knew about her struggles with anxiety. He'd never judged her for it, never made her feel weak or inadequate. Instead, he'd quietly made sure she was assigned to calmer routes and had even recommended the therapist who'd been helping her work through her fears. "You know," he said slowly, "I might have a problem that could use your expertise." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Mike, I'm not even technically an employee anymore. My resignation goes into effect at midnight." "Hear me out." He stood and walked to the window, gesturing toward the tarmac where a lone aircraft sat isolated from the others. "Flight 447 to Chicago. We've got a medical emergency passenger who specifically requested a flight attendant with extensive medical training. Apparently, her daughter looked up our crew manifest online and found out about your EMT certification." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had indeed been a certified emergency medical technician before joining the airline, a qualification that had served her well during in-flight medical emergencies. But the thought of stepping back onto a plane, especially in a storm like this, made her chest tighten with familiar dread. "Mike, you know I can't." "The passenger is an 8-year-old girl with a rare heart condition," he continued, his voice gentle but urgent. "She's flying to Chicago Children's Hospital for emergency surgery. Her mother is frantic, and the girl is scared out of her mind. The storm has grounded most of our medical transport options, and this commercial flight is her only chance to make it to the hospital in time." The weight of the situation settled on Sarah's shoulders like a familiar burden. Throughout her career, she'd prided herself on being the crew member others turned to in crisis situations. She'd talked nervous flyers through turbulence, assisted with medical emergencies, and even helped deliver that baby over Colorado. Her colleagues used to joke that she had a sixth sense for knowing exactly what passengers needed before they even asked. What about Jenny or Maria? They're both excellent with medical situations. Jenny called in sick, and Maria is stuck in Denver with the crew that couldn't make it back due to the weather. Mike turned to face her, his eyes serious. Sarah, I know what you're going through. I know this is the last thing you want to do, but this little girl, she reminds me of my granddaughter. Same age, same frightened look in her eyes when she doesn't understand what's happening to her body. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar war between her rational mind and her heart. Her therapist had been clear. Avoiding flights entirely might provide temporary relief, but it wouldn't address the underlying anxiety. She'd suggested gradual exposure therapy, starting with short flights in good weather. This would be neither short nor in good weather. The forecast shows the storm clearing in about an hour, Mike continued. It should be smooth flying once we get above it. And Sarah, I've been flying for 32 years. I wouldn't ask this of you if I didn't believe we could get this little girl to Chicago safely. Through the window, Sarah could see ground crew members in bright yellow rain gear working around the aircraft. Despite the storm, they moved with purpose and precision, ensuring the plane would be ready whenever the weather cleared. Their dedication reminded her why she'd fallen in love with aviation in the first place. It wasn't just about the flying. It was about the countless people working together to connect families, reunite loved ones, and sometimes save lives. Tell me about her, Sarah said quietly, surprising herself with the words. Mike's face softened. Emma Patterson, 8 years old. She has a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Basically, her heart muscle is too thick, making it hard for blood to flow properly. She was supposed to have surgery next month, but she had an episode yesterday that moved everything up to emergency status. Her mother, Rebecca, is a single mom who's been juggling work and Emma's medical care for years. They live in a small town outside Portland with limited medical facilities. Sarah could picture them, a scared mother trying to stay strong for her daughter, and a little girl who probably didn't fully understand why she felt so tired all the time. Why running and playing left her breathless when other kids seemed fine. The image tugged at something deep in Sarah's chest, a protective instinct that had driven her to become both an EMT and a flight attendant. The surgery has to happen within the next 18 hours, Mike continued. If we don't get her to Chicago tonight, she'll have to wait until the storm system passes completely, which could be days. Her cardiologist says that's too risky given her current condition. The crew lounge fell silent except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. Sarah stared at her reflection in the glass, seeing not the confident flight attendant she'd once been, but a woman who'd let fear begin to define her choices. She thought about Emma Patterson, probably sitting in the terminal right now, clutching her mother's hand and wondering if the scary feelings in her chest would ever go away. If I do this, Sarah said slowly, it's not because I'm ready to come back. It's just this one flight. Mike nodded, understanding the weight of what she was considering. Just this one flight. Sarah took a deep breath, tasting the familiar mixture of coffee and recycled air that had been the background of her working life for so long. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the airport, but she could see patches where the rain seemed lighter, where the gray sky showed hints of breaking clouds. I'll need to check the medical kit inventory, she said, her training taking over even as her heart hammered against her ribs. And I'll want to meet with Emma and her mother before boarding to assess the situation and establish trust. Of course. Mike's relief was visible. Sarah, I can't tell you how much. Don't thank me yet, she interrupted, pulling her uniform from her flight bag with hands that trembled slightly. Let me get changed and see if I remember how to do this job. As Mike left to begin his pre-flight preparations, Sarah stood alone in the crew lounge, holding the navy blue blazer she'd thought she'd never wear again. The fabric felt both foreign and familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend after a long and complicated absence. She thought about the resignation letter in her purse, about the new life she'd been planning to start, about the fear that had been her constant companion for months. But mostly, she thought about a little girl named Emma who needed to get to Chicago, and how sometimes the most important flights aren't the ones we plan to take but the ones we choose to take anyway. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood outside Gate 12 in her freshly pressed uniform, her hands steady despite the chaos in her mind. The gate area was nearly empty except for a small cluster of passengers who'd been rebooked onto Flight 447, the only departure that hadn't been canceled due to the storm. Among them, she immediately spotted Rebecca and Emma Patterson. Rebecca looked exactly as Sarah had imagined, mid-30s, auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under, green eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about her daughter. She wore scrubs underneath a worn denim jacket, suggesting she'd come straight from work, probably her job as a nurse at the local clinic, Sarah guessed. Her entire body language screamed exhaustion mixed with barely contained panic. But it was Emma who broke Sarah's heart. The little girl sat curled up in her mother's lap, her small frame dwarfed by an oversized Chicago Cubs sweatshirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back in 2 braids that had seen better days, and her pale complexion made her look fragile as porcelain. Most striking were her eyes, intelligent hazel eyes that held far too much awareness for an 8-year-old. This was a child who understood more about her condition than any kid should have to. Mrs. Patterson. Sarah approached them with the professional smile she'd perfected over 15 years, though her heart was racing. I'm Sarah Chen, your flight attendant for today's journey to Chicago. Rebecca looked up with a mixture of hope and desperation. Oh, thank God. The captain said you have medical training. I'm Rebecca, and this is Emma. She unconsciously tightened her arms around her daughter, as if physical closeness could protect her from everything threatening her small world. Emma peeked out from behind her mother's arm, studying Sarah with curious eyes. Are you the lady who's going to help me not be scared on the airplane? The direct question caught Sarah off guard. Children had a way of cutting through adult pretenses that could be both refreshing and terrifying. I'm going to do my best to make sure you feel safe and comfortable, Sarah replied, crouching down to Emma's eye level. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now? Tired, Emma said simply, and my chest feels funny, like there's a bird flapping inside it sometimes. Mama says the doctors in Chicago can fix it, but I don't want to leave my stuffed elephant at home. She held up a worn gray elephant with one missing ear and a crooked smile stitched in red thread. What's your elephant's name? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Peanut. He's been with me since I was little. Littler than now, I mean. He goes everywhere. With me. Even to the scary doctor appointments. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you think he'll be scared of flying? Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. This brave little girl was worried about her stuffed animal being frightened while facing her own terrifying medical journey. I think Peanut is very lucky to have such a caring friend looking out for him. And between you and me, she leaned. Inconspiratorially, I think elephants are naturally good flyers. Have you ever noticed how their ears are shaped almost like wings? Emma giggled for the first time since Sarah had approached, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. They do look like wings. Peanut, did you hear that? You're going to be a flying elephant. Rebecca caught Sarah's eye over Emma's head, mouthing a silent, "Thank you." In that moment, Sarah realized something profound was happening. Her anxiety hadn't disappeared, her palms were still clammy and she could feel her heart beating irregularly, but it was being overshadowed by something stronger. Purpose. Mrs. Patterson, Rebecca, can we talk for a moment while Emma gets acquainted with Peanut's new flying abilities? Sarah stood and gestured toward a quieter corner of the gate area. Rebecca carefully transferred Emma to one of the chairs, making sure she was comfortable before stepping aside with Sarah. "I have to admit, I'm terrified," she began without preamble. "Emma's been stable for months, but yesterday she collapsed at school during recess. The local ER doctor said her condition has deteriorated faster than anyone expected." Sarah nodded, her medical training kicking in. "What are her current symptoms? Any shortness of breath, chest pain, irregular heartbeat?" "All of the above, but intermittent. She has episodes where her heart rate spikes, and she gets dizzy and exhausted. The cardiologist in Portland wanted to life flight her to Chicago, but the storm grounded everything. This commercial flight is literally our only option." Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "I keep wondering if I should have pushed harder for the surgery months ago, if I could have prevented this emergency somehow. Rebecca, look at me." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who'd talked countless passengers through their worst fears. "You are not responsible for your daughter's medical condition. You've been advocating for her, caring for her, and now you're getting her to the help she needs. That makes you an incredible mother, not a failure." Tears welled up in Rebecca's eyes. I can't lose her. She's everything I have. When her father left 3 years ago after the diagnosis, it was just me and Emma against the world. She's been so brave through all the appointments and tests and medications. I need to be brave for her now." Sarah understood that kind of desperation, that fierce protective love that could drive someone to impossible lengths. She'd seen it in passengers before, but never had it resonated so deeply with her own fears and struggles. "What can you tell me about managing her symptoms during the flight?" "She has emergency medication if her heart rate becomes dangerously elevated, sublingual nitroglycerin that dissolves under her tongue. The cardiologist also gave her a mild sedative in case the stress of flying triggers an episode, but I am nervous about using it at altitude." Rebecca pulled a small medical bag from her purse, showing Sarah the carefully labeled medications. "I'm a nurse, but pediatric cardiology isn't my specialty. I feel like I'm flying blind here, no pun intended." Sarah examined the medications, her EMT training helping her understand the dosages and potential interactions. "I'll stay close to you both throughout the flight. We'll monitor her continuously, and if anything seems concerning, I'll coordinate with the captain. He can request priority landing at the nearest suitable airport if necessary." "There's something else," Rebecca said, glancing back at Emma, who was now showing Peanut the view out the terminal window. "Emma doesn't know how serious this really is. I've been trying to frame it as the doctors wanting to help her feel less tired, but she's smart. She picks up on my anxiety, and I'm afraid that if she realizes how scared I am, she'll panic." This revelation added another layer of complexity to the situation. Sarah would need to maintain a careful balance, staying alert to Emma's medical condition while projecting calm confidence to keep both mother and daughter from spiraling into panic. It was exactly the kind of challenge that had once made her love her job before fear had clouded her judgment. "We'll take our cues from Emma," Sarah decided. "Kids are often braver than we give them credit for when they feel supported and informed at an age-appropriate level. Let's go back to her." As they returned to Emma, Sarah noticed the little girl was breathing slightly faster than normal, and there was a faint blue tinge around her lips, subtle signs that might indicate her cardiovascular system was under stress. Not immediately dangerous, but definitely something to monitor closely. "Emma," Sarah said, settling into the chair next to her, "I want to explain what's going to happen on our flight today. First, we're going to wait for the storm to calm down. A little bit. Maybe another 30 minutes. Then we'll board the airplane, which is like a really big, safe flying room. I'll make sure you and your mom have seats together, and I'll check on you lots during the flight to make sure you're comfortable." "Will it be bumpy because of the storm?" Emma asked, clutching Peanut tighter. Sarah chose her words carefully. "There might be a little bumpiness at first, kind of like riding in a car over a bumpy road. But once we get up above the storm clouds, it gets very smooth and peaceful. Have you ever been in an airplane before? Emma shook her head. Mama and I were going to take a trip to see Grandma in California last year, but then I got sick and we couldn't go. This is my first time flying. Then you're in for something really special, Sarah said, pushing down her own anxiety to focus on Emma's wonder. When we get above the clouds, you'll see the most beautiful view, like looking down at a white blanket covering the whole world. And at night, you can see city lights twinkling like stars scattered across the ground. Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity, temporarily overshadowing her fear. Really? Can Peanut look out the window too? Absolutely. In fact, I think Peanut deserves a window seat for his first flight, don't you? As they continued talking, Sarah kept one part of her mind focused on Emma's breathing and color, while another part wrestled with her own demons. Every few minutes, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that signaled the beginning of a panic attack, but she forced herself to breathe deeply and focus on Emma's needs instead of her own fears. Just then, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the gate announcement system. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance from air traffic control. The storm is moving east, and we have a window of opportunity for departure. We'll begin boarding Flight 447 to Chicago in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but before she could retreat into her anxiety, Emma reached out and took her hand with surprising strength for such a small person. Ms. Sarah, Emma said quietly, are you scared too? The question hung in the air, like a challenge. Sarah could lie, maintain the professional facade that everything was perfectly fine, or she could share a moment of honest connection with this remarkable little girl who was facing her own fears with incredible courage. A little bit, Sarah admitted, squeezing Emma's hand gently. Sometimes even grown-ups get nervous about flying. But you know what I've learned? Being scared doesn't mean we can't be brave. It just means we have to choose to do the right thing even when it's hard. Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 8-year-old wisdom. That's what Mama always tells me about the doctor appointments. She says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's words, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar tightness of panic, but something warmer and more powerful. For the first time in months, her fear was being balanced by something stronger. The need to be worthy of this little girl's trust. Emma, Sarah said, would you like to be my co-pilot for keeping everyone calm and safe on this flight? I could use a brave assistant. Really? Can Peanut be the co-pilot? I think that's exactly what we need, a whole team of brave flyers working together. As the boarding announcement began, Sarah stood up and smoothed her uniform, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar but long-absent friend. She had no idea what challenges awaited them at 35,000 feet, but for the first time in 6 months, she was ready to find out. The boarding process went smoothly until they reached the aircraft door. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she stepped onto the plane. The familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning solution triggered an immediate flood of memories from her last panic attack. Her hands began to shake slightly as she guided Emma and Rebecca to their seats in row 6, but Emma's excited chatter about Peanut's first airplane ride kept her grounded in the moment. Look, Mama, the seats have little TV screens. Emma bounced slightly in her window seat, pressing her face against the small porthole. Miss Sarah, can we see the storm clouds from up here? We'll get a perfect view once we're airborne, Sarah managed, checking that their seatbelts were properly fastened while discreetly observing Emma's breathing. The little girl seemed stable, though her excitement was causing her heart rate to elevate slightly, visible in the faint flutter of her pulse at her throat. As Sarah moved through her pre-flight safety demonstrations, muscle memory took over. She'd performed these same motions thousands of times, but tonight felt different. Every gesture, every safety instruction carried additional weight because of the precious cargo in row 6. When she demonstrated the oxygen mask procedure, she caught Emma watching intently, and their eyes met across the cabin. "Remember," Sarah said, speaking to the entire plane but looking directly at Emma, "if you're traveling with someone who needs assistance, put your own mask on first, then help others. Sometimes taking care of yourself first is the best way to help the people you love." The words resonated in the cabin with unexpected meaning, and Sarah realized she was speaking as much to herself as to the passengers. For months, she'd been so focused on her own fear and anxiety that she'd forgotten the fundamental truth of her profession. Sometimes you had to push through your own discomfort to serve others. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure. We've got a clear window ahead, and Chicago is reporting perfect conditions for our arrival." As Sarah took her position in the jump seat for takeoff, she could see Emma pressed against the window, with Peanut positioned for the optimal view. Rebecca sat rigidly beside her daughter, one hand on Emma's arm, the other clutching the medical bag like a lifeline. The sight of their connection, mother and daughter facing the unknown together, sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Sarah. The engines spooled up with their familiar whine, and Sarah felt the aircraft begin its roll toward the runway. This was always the moment when her panic attacks hit hardest, the point of no return when the plane committed fully to flight. Her breathing became shallow and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool cabin air. But then, she heard Emma's voice clear and wondering. "Peanut, look how fast we're going. We're really going to fly." The pure joy in the little girl's voice cut through Sarah's anxiety like a beacon in fog. Here was a child facing a life-threatening medical condition, taking her first airplane ride to undergo emergency surgery, and she was focused on the magic of flight rather than her fears. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to channel some of Emma's courage. The takeoff was surprisingly smooth despite the storm conditions on the ground. As they climbed through the turbulent air near the surface, Sarah felt the familiar lift and bank of the aircraft working its way above the weather. Through the cabin windows, she could see the dark storm clouds falling away beneath them, replaced by a carpet of stars that seemed impossibly bright after the gray afternoon. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, Captain Rodriguez announced. "The seatbelt sign is now off and flight attendants are free to move about the cabin. We're expecting a smooth flight to Chicago with an arrival time of 10:47 p.m. local time." Sarah unbuckled herself and immediately headed to row 6, but what she found there stopped her in her tracks. Emma was slumped against her mother's shoulder, her face pale and her breathing labored. Rebecca's nurse training was evident as she checked her daughter's pulse, her face tight with controlled panic. "Her heart rate is elevated, around 140, Rebecca whispered urgently as Sarah knelt beside their row. "It started during takeoff. I don't know if it's excitement, anxiety, or if she's having an episode." Sarah quickly assessed Emma's condition. The little girl was conscious but clearly struggling. Her lips had a more pronounced blue tinge and she was breathing rapidly through her nose. Most concerning was the way she clutched Peanut against her chest, as if the stuffed elephant could somehow anchor her to stability. "Emma, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Sarah kept her voice calm and steady, though her own heart was racing. "I need you to look at me." Emma's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto Sarah's face. "Ms. Sarah, I don't feel good. The bird in my chest is flying too fast." "I know, honey. We're going to help you feel better." Sarah turned to Rebecca. "Has this happened before during stressful situations?" "A few times, but never this severe." The cardiologist said changes in altitude and air pressure could potentially trigger episodes, but we didn't have a choice. Rebecca's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. "Should I give her the nitroglycerin?" Sarah's mind raced through her medical training. Nitroglycerin could help with Emma's condition, but administering cardiac medication to a child at altitude required careful consideration. Too little might not help. Too much could cause dangerous drops in blood pressure. Let's try some calming techniques first, Sarah decided. Emma, I want you to breathe with me. In through your nose, slow and steady, then out through your mouth like you're blowing out birthday candles. As Sarah guided Emma through breathing exercises, she noticed something unexpected. Despite her medical distress, Emma kept one small hand wrapped around Peanut's trunk, and she was whispering something to the stuffed elephant between breaths. "What are you telling Peanut?" Sarah asked gently. "I'm telling him. It's okay to be scared. But we're brave flyers," Emma managed between breaths. "Just like you said." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was this incredibly sick little girl comforting her toy and by extension herself with the same words Sarah had used to comfort her. Emma was using their conversation about courage to get through her medical crisis. "That's exactly right," Sarah said, fighting back tears. "You and Peanut are the bravest flyers I've ever met." But then Emma's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. Her breathing became more labored and her small hand went to her chest. "Mama, the bird is really mad now. It hurts." Rebecca didn't hesitate. She pulled out the small vial of nitroglycerin and carefully measured out the pediatric dose. "Emma, baby, I need you to let this dissolve under your tongue. It's going to taste funny, but it will help the bird calm down." As Rebecca administered the medication, Sarah made a crucial decision. She activated the call button that would connect her directly to the cockpit. "Captain Rodriguez, we have a medical situation in progress. I need you to contact Chicago Approach and request priority handling for a pediatric cardiac patient." Mike's voice came back immediately, calm and professional. "Copy that, Sarah. I'm already in contact with medical services at O'Hare. How's the patient?" Sarah looked at Emma, who was now resting against her mother with her eyes closed, the medication beginning to take effect. Her breathing was still rapid, but some color was returning to her cheeks. "Stable, but needs immediate ground transport upon landing." "Understood. We're beginning our descent early. ETA is now 10:15. As the aircraft began its gentle descent toward Chicago, Sarah realized something profound had happened during Emma's medical episode. While focused entirely on caring for the little girl, her own anxiety had completely disappeared. The panic attacks that had plagued her for months were nowhere to be found, replaced by the clarity and purpose she'd once taken for granted. But the biggest twist was yet to come. As Emma's condition stabilized and she dozed fitfully against her mother's shoulder, Rebecca reached across the aisle and took Sarah's hand. "There's something I need to tell you," Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Something I couldn't say in front of Emma." Sarah leaned closer, sensing the weight of what was coming. "The doctors in Chicago, they're not just doing surgery to make Emma feel better." Rebecca's voice broke slightly. "Her condition has progressed to end-stage heart failure. This surgery, a heart transplant, it's her only chance. Without it, she has maybe weeks, possibly days." The revelation hit Sarah like turbulence in clear skies. Emma wasn't just a sick little girl going for routine surgery. She was a child fighting for her life, and she didn't even know it. The courage and joy Sarah had witnessed, Emma's concern for Peanut's first flight, her excitement about seeing the storm clouds from above, all of it took on a heartbreaking new dimension. "She doesn't know," Sarah whispered. "How do you tell an 8-year-old that she needs a new heart to live? That we're flying toward the most dangerous thing she'll ever face?" Tears streamed down Rebecca's cheeks. "I've been trying to keep her spirits up, to let her be a little girl for as long as possible. But after tonight, after the surgery, everything changes." Sarah looked at Emma's peaceful face as she slept, Peanut tucked securely in her arms. This brave little girl who had helped Sarah rediscover her own courage was facing something far more terrifying than any storm or turbulence. The irony was overwhelming. Emma had been teaching Sarah about bravery while facing the greatest challenge of her young life. "Rebecca," Sarah said firmly, We're going to get her to that hospital. And whatever happens next, Emma will know she's surrounded by people who believe in her strength." As the lights of Chicago began to appear through the windows, Sarah made a silent promise to the sleeping little girl in seat 6A. This flight might be ending, but their journey together was far from over. Emma had reminded Sarah what it meant, to choose courage over fear, and now Sarah would do everything in her power to ensure Emma had the chance to keep being brave. The aircraft descended through the clear night sky toward Chicago, carrying with it a little girl who didn't know she was flying toward the fight of her life, a mother carrying an unbearable secret, and a flight attendant who had just rediscovered why she'd fallen in love with flying in the first place, not for the destinations, but for the people whose lives intersected briefly at 35,000 feet, leaving lasting impacts on each other's hearts. The approach into O'Hare was the smoothest Sarah had experienced in months, but she barely noticed. Her entire focus was on Emma, who had awakened during the descent with renewed energy, pressing her nose to the window as the sprawling lights of Chicago spread out below them like a constellation fallen to earth. "Look, Peanut," Emma whispered excitedly to her stuffed elephant. "The city looks like someone spilled glitter everywhere. Miss Sarah, is that where the doctors are going to help me feel less tired?" Sarah's throat tightened at the innocent question. "Yes, sweetheart. That's where some very special doctors are waiting to take care of you." As the wheels touched down with barely a bump, Sarah heard Captain Rodriguez's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago O'Hare. For our special passenger in 6A, ground medical personnel are standing by, and we'll have you off the aircraft in just a few minutes." The other passengers seemed to understand the gravity of the situation without being told the details. As they prepared to deplane, many of them approached row 6 to offer quiet words of encouragement to Emma and Rebecca. An elderly businessman pressed a small teddy bear into Emma's hands for Peanut to have a friend, and a young mother with her own toddler whispered a prayer over Emma's seat. Sarah had seen this phenomenon before, the way strangers became a temporary family when someone among them was in crisis. Tonight, though, it felt more profound, more personal. These people had shared space with Emma for just over 2 hours, but her courage had touched something in all of them. As the aircraft came to a complete stop at the gate, Sarah saw the flashing lights of an ambulance through the terminal windows. The medical team was indeed ready, but what she saw next took her breath away. Captain Rodriguez had left the cockpit and was walking down the aisle toward them, still in his uniform but with an expression she'd never seen on his weathered face, a mixture of professional concern and deeply personal emotion. "Emma," he said, crouching down beside her seat, "I'm Captain Mike. I flew you and Peanut here tonight, and I wanted to meet the bravest co-pilot I've ever had on my aircraft." Emma's eyes widened with wonder. "You're the one who made the airplane." "Fly? Can I see where you sit?" "Actually," Mike smiled, "I have something special for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of plastic pilot's wings, the kind airlines used to give to children, but these were different. They were real metal wings, the kind worn by actual pilots. "These are my spare wings. I want you to wear them so all the doctors in Chicago know they're taking care of a real pilot." As Mike pinned the wings to Emma's Cubs sweatshirt, Sarah noticed tears in his eyes. Later, she would learn that his own granddaughter had undergone heart surgery the previous year, and Emma's brave spirit had reminded him of those terrifying days in the pediatric ICU. The medical team boarded efficiently, 2 paramedics and a pediatric cardiac nurse from Children's Hospital who introduced herself as Jennifer. Sarah quickly briefed them on Emma's condition during the flight, the medication administered, and her current stable status. "You did excellent work," Jennifer told Sarah quietly. Quick thinking on the nitroglycerin timing and keeping her calm probably prevented a more serious episode. As they prepared to transfer Emma to the wheelchair that would take her to the waiting ambulance, the little girl suddenly reached for Sarah's hand. "Ms. Sarah, will you come with me to see the doctors? I know you have to work, but I'm a little scared now." The request pierced straight through Sarah's heart. She looked at Rebecca, who nodded gratefully, then at Captain Rodriguez, who was already reaching for his phone. "Sarah," Mike said quietly, "I'm calling in a favor with scheduling. You're officially off duty as of right now, and your return flight tomorrow is covered. Go with Emma." As they made their way through the terminal, Emma insisted on walking. Part of the way, holding Peanut in one arm and Sarah's hand with the other. The pilot's wings glinted under the fluorescent lights, and despite everything, the medical crisis, the revelation about her condition, the uncertainty ahead, Emma maintained the wonder and curiosity that had characterized her throughout their journey. "Miss Sarah," Emma said as they approached the exit, "are you not scared of flying anymore?" The question stopped Sarah in her tracks. In all the chaos and medical drama, she hadn't realized what had happened. Her panic attacks, the anxiety that had driven her to resignation, the fear that had controlled her life for 6 months, all of it had vanished somewhere over the clouds between Portland and Chicago, not because it had been cured by therapy or medication, but because it had been overwhelmed by something stronger, the need to be present for someone who needed her. "You know what, Emma? I think you helped me remember something important tonight. Being scared is okay, but it doesn't have to stop us from taking care of the people we love. Like how Mama takes care of me even when she's worried." Sarah looked at Rebecca, who was walking alongside them with quiet strength, carrying the weight of knowledge that would soon have to be shared with her daughter. Exactly like that. The ambulance ride to Chicago Children's Hospital was surprisingly calm. Emma dozed against her mother's side, exhausted by the day's events, while Sarah held her small hand and marveled at how much her world had changed in a single evening. This morning, she had been a former flight attendant running away from her fears. Tonight, she was... what? She wasn't sure yet, but she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. At the hospital, as Emma was wheeled into the pediatric cardiac unit, she suddenly sat up and pulled Peanut close to her chest. "Mama," she said with startling clarity, "the doctors are going to tell me something scary, aren't they? Something more than just helping me feel less tired?" Rebecca's composure finally cracked, and tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "Yes, baby. They are. But remember what Miss Sarah taught us about being brave?" Emma nodded solemnly, then looked directly at Sarah. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what you need to do even when you are scared." "That's right, sweetheart. Then I guess Peanut and I need to be really brave tomorrow, huh?" As they settled Emma into her room, with its child-friendly decorations and state-of-the-art cardiac monitoring equipment, Sarah realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This 8-year-old girl, who would soon learn she needed a heart transplant to survive, was teaching everyone around her about courage, dignity, and grace under pressure. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the pediatric cardiac surgeon, arrived within an hour. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, and she spoke to Emma with the perfect balance of honesty and hope. "Emma, your heart has been working very hard for a long time, and it's getting tired. We need to give you a new heart so you can run and play and grow up to be whatever you want to be." "A new heart?" Emma processed this information with the serious consideration of someone much older. "Will my new heart like flying? Because Peanut and I want to travel to lots of places." Dr. Hernandez smiled. "I think your new heart will love flying, and the best part is, it will be strong enough to take you anywhere you want to go." As the medical team prepared Emma for the pre-surgical procedures, she made one final request that would stay with Sarah forever. "Miss Sarah, when I wake up with my new heart, will you teach me more about flying? I think I want to be a pilot someday, like Captain Mike." "Emma," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "I promise you that when you wake up, we'll talk about all the places you're going to fly to. And maybe I'll go back to flying too. You've reminded me why I loved it in the first place." 3 days later, Emma Patterson received a new heart from a donor family who chose to give the gift of life to a little girl they'd never meet. The surgery was successful, and Emma's first words upon waking up were, Did Peanut get a new heart too? Sarah stayed in Chicago for all 3 days, sleeping in the family lounge and holding Rebecca's hand through the longest night of their lives. When Emma finally opened her eyes in the cardiac ICU, still groggy from anesthesia but with color in her cheeks for the first time since Sarah had met her, she was wearing Captain Rodriguez's pilot wings pinned to her hospital gown. "Ms. Sarah," Emma whispered, "my new heart feels like it wants to fly." 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the crew lounge at Portland International Airport, wearing her Pacific Airways uniform and holding a letter of reinstatement. Her resignation had been reversed, her anxiety attacks had never returned, and she'd been promoted to senior flight attendant on international routes. On her lapel, next to her name tag, she wore a small pin, a silver airplane with wings given to her by an 8-year-old girl who had taught her that sometimes the most important journeys begin when we choose to fly toward our fears instead of away from them. Emma Patterson, now 9 years old with a healthy heart and an insatiable curiosity about aviation, had returned to school, joined the soccer team, and written a book report about female pilots that earned her first place in the district science fair. She kept Peanut on her bedside table, along with the pilot's wings from Captain Rodriguez, and every night before bed, she looked out her window at the planes flying overhead and dreamed of the places she would go. And sometimes, on clear nights when the wind was calm and the stars were bright, Sarah would look out the cockpit window during a flight and remember a little girl who hadn't known she was dying, who had faced the unknown with courage and wonder, and who had accidentally saved a flight attendant's career by showing her what it meant to choose bravery over fear. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that she'd found her wings again by helping someone else learn to fly. But then again, she'd learned from Emma that the best flights aren't always the ones we plan. Sometimes they're the ones we're brave enough to take when someone needs us most. Emma's new heart was indeed strong enough to take her anywhere she wanted to go. And someday, Sarah knew, she'd be there to help her reach the clouds.